Hey everyone! So let's talk about a story you probably think you know inside it out, King David's rise to power. But what if I told you that the Bible actually tells this story in two completely different ways? I mean, one is this gritty political thriller just packed with conflict and civil war, and the other, well, it's this seamless, unified, and frankly, perfect transfer of power. And that's what we're diving into, the idealized history of the chronicler's King David.
And that really brings us to the central mystery here. Why on earth would an author, this guy we call the chronicler, retell the epic story of David becoming king and just cut out all the drama, all the good stuff? There's no civil war, no political backstabbing, none of that 7-year struggle for control. Why would you smooth over all the interesting, messy parts of history?
All right, let's get into it. To really understand why the chronicler paints David as this perfect, ideal king, we first have to see how he frames David's predecessor, King Saul. It all kicks off with his very specific theological reason for why Saul was disqualified from the throne to begin with.
You know, the book of Samuel gives us this long, tragic, detailed play-by-play of Saul's final battle on the hill of Gilboa. But the chronicler, he breezes through all of that in just a few verses. He's not interested in military strategy or who did what. He has one question and one question only, and it's a spiritual one. Why was Saul removed from power?
And the chronicler's answer really boils down to this one single supercritical Hebrew word, ma'al. Now, this isn't just about making a mistake or, committing a sin. Ma'al is unfaithfulness. It's a deep, gut-level betrayal. It's about breaking your fundamental oath of loyalty to God. For the chronicler, it's a complete failure to trust, and that is the sin that brings judgment.
So you can see the two paths laid out right here. Saul's path was all about ma'al, unfaithfulness. I mean, when he was desperate for answers before his last battle, what did he do? Instead of seeking God, and that verb, darash, is key for the chronicler, he went and consulted a necromancer, a totally forbidden source. He broke trust, and for the chronicler, that one act of unfaithfulness disqualified him completely. End of story.
And this, right here, this leads us to the most crucial point of this whole retelling. The chronicler draws this massive, bright line between Saul's failure and David's flaws. See, it's not about being sinless. It's about the kind of failure we're talking about.
As one scholar, Dr. August Konkel, puts it really well, the chronicler is totally aware of David's whole story. I mean, everybody knew about his huge sins. The whole thing with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband, it was famous. But the chronicler makes a very deliberate choice to edit all of that out. He's not trying to hide it. He's making a completely different point. And here is the core of his argument. Saul was disqualified because his sin was ma'al, a fundamental, permanent state of untrustworthiness. David, on the other hand, yeah, he committed terrible sins, but he never fundamentally broke faith. He always came back, he sought forgiveness, and he stayed loyal to the covenant. In the chronicler's eyes, David's sins were forgivable, but Saul's unfaithfulness was a permanent game-over disqualification.
So, with Saul out of the picture for this deep spiritual failure, the chronicler gets to work building his ideal version of King David. He is actively, intentionally constructing an image of a perfect, universally accepted king, and he does it by basically ignoring some pretty inconvenient historical facts.
Okay, the key thing to get here is that the chronicler is not writing a modern history textbook. His goal isn't some precise second-by-second timeline. His goal is theological. He wants to communicate a powerful truth about national unity, a unity that he believes was God's plan from the very beginning.
And you can just see that goal in action when you compare the two accounts. The book of Samuel describes a brutal 7-year civil war after Saul dies. The kingdom was split, right? David ruled the south, Saul's son ruled the north. But the chronicler's version, the moment Saul is dead, bam, immediate transfer of power. No war, no division, all of Israel, north and south, gets behind David instantly.
And to just hammer this point home, the chronicler shows this absolute avalanche of support. He gives these long lists of warrior groups just flocking to David from every single corner of the nation, from his early fugitive days at Adullam to warriors from the east, north, and south. And then, get this, he makes a special point to mention warriors from the tribe of Benjamin. That's Saul's own tribe. The message is crystal clear. Everybody was on Team David from day one.
This incredible, almost fanatical loyalty is captured in this amazing story about David's mighty men. David just casually mentions he's thirsty for some water from a well that's behind enemy lines. So what do his guys do? They risk their lives, break through the enemy, and get it for him. But David doesn't drink it. He pours it out as an offering to God,
because he gets that it represents the very lifeblood of these men. It's this sacred symbol of their total devotion to him as their king.
So why? Why go through all this trouble to rewrite the past? What is the ultimate point behind this squeaky clean, idealized history? Well, this is where we get to the chronicler's big reveal.
Okay, so in the older history, in the book of Samuel, there's a rebellion later on, led by a guy named Sheba. And this is the rallying cry of the northern tribes. What portion have we in David? It's a shout of division, of disloyalty, of dissent. It really represents the historical reality that Israel was often this fractured collection of tribes.
But now, listen to what the chronicler does. This is just brilliant. He takes that old, painful memory of disloyalty, and he intentionally flips it on its head. He writes a new poem, a poem of loyalty, and he puts it in the mouths of David's earliest supporters. "We are yours, O David." It is a direct, powerful rewriting of the nation's entire story about itself.
And that is the whole point. The chronicler is writing for people hundreds of years after David, an audience that's trying to rebuild its identity. And his message to them is powerful and clear. Stop thinking of yourselves as warring tribes. That's not who you are in God's eyes. Remember this ideal. You are one nation, unified under God's chosen king, David. So, what does this all mean? This ancient way of telling a story actually has huge implications for how we think about history and narrative even today. It kind of forces us to ask some pretty important questions.
The chronicler reminds us that every history, every single one, is a story being told by someone, and it's being told for a reason. He wasn't trying to lie or deceive people. He was trying to inspire a broken community with an ideal to strive for. And it leaves us with this final thought. Whenever we're reading history, or watching a news story, or hearing any narrative, it's always worth asking, who is the narrator, and what is their goal?